Hello everyone, welcome back to Exploder. My name's Dan. Now, instead of the usual rigmarole getting into it, let's just get right to the topic. Pro wrestling is one of those things that have always had, or seems to always had, some kind of control figure. A general manager, a commissioner, a booker. Now, while they existed behind the scenes, for a long time in professional wrestling, there wasn't really a figurehead character to actually make the matches. Matches were just on the poster, you showed up to the matches, and they happened. Wrestlers maybe challenged each other, or something to that effect, and the only thing you had really from a authority standpoint was either an announcer who announced it to the crowd or a referee who rung the bell. So the idea of a commissioner or a president or something on TV was really came with the advent of television in the late 70s and 80s, and that's really where it came from. So here I'm talking about, in this one I'm going to talk about, this is called The Good, the Bad, and the Summerfest. What does that reference refer to? If you know what I'm talking about with the last line, buckle in, it's going to be fun. If you don't, I'm going to let you know. Figureheads are always have a place in professional wrestling now, because now fans expect someone to come in and make the matches. They just don't show up, like they'll announce a match, but it's not like they're going to, every match is made ahead of time. Sometimes they do challenges, and sometimes even when they make a challenge, some authority figure has to agree to it. They have to say, okay, we're going to do it. Right? Currently have Kurt Angle, or Baron Corbin, Constable Corbin, because this is written in the 1850s, and the Constable Corbin is the acting GM or whatever the hell, and you have Paige on SmackDown, so on and so forth. But let's go back a little bit and talk about the other figureheads in wrestling's history. Now, the earliest one, a lot of wrestling fans, if you're around my age, I'm 33, if you're around my age, the first one comes to your mind when you hear about a president or an acting GM or whatever it's called is Jack Tunney. Yes, probably the most boring man in professional wrestling, that's not Linda McMahon. I mean, let's call it what it is. She was a robot. But other than her, Jack Tunney was really straight to the point, really quiet, but he had authority, and you liked that. And Jack Tunney actually held the position until, I believe, from the 80s until 1995. Now, of course, he was completely an acting guy. He worked in the office, but he wasn't in charge. Vince McMahon was an announcer and didn't want anyone to know that he was the boss. So Jack Tunney was the guy who came out and made the decisions, and so on and so forth. And back in the day, if you saw Jack Tunney, stuff was about to go down. Then, of course, he was replaced by Gorilla Monsoon. Gorilla Monsoon was the interim WWF president, and that's the same thing. He came out, he exuded that confidence, and then he got Vader bombed. So maybe he shouldn't have exuded so much confidence. In WCW's side, they had the WCW Championship Committee. Now, I remember this being for a few years, especially when WCW's main show was WCW Saturday Night. The Championship Committee who was the ones who made the decisions. They made the decision of having Flair versus Vader for the world title versus career at Starrcade 93. It was Nick Bockwinkel and so on and so forth. It was a group of older wrestlers that you could trot out every once in a while, and they were the WCW Championship Committee because WCW did everything by a committee, which explains, bankruptcy. Then we get to the meat of things. The figureheads during the Monday Night War. Now, the weirdest thing was, at one point, the figureheads, quote unquote, on TV were actually the people making the decisions. On the WCW end, for a while, you had the Championship Committee, but you didn't really have a guy making the matches. It was sort of matches were made ahead of time, or the NWO attacked, or so on and so forth. And then finally, in late 96, Roddy Piper, or Vince, okay, not Vince, but Eric Bischoff sort of subtly, during trying to sign the Hulk Hogan Roddy Piper match, he sort of outed himself, because he was doing what Vince McMahon was doing. He was an announcer. And during this time, he sort of outed himself as president of WCW, because he was the one trying to sign the match. He wasn't on the desk anymore. Tony Schiavone was, and all the other guys, but he was out doing things. So he sort of outed himself. And then, so he sort of outed himself as a character at that time, sort of as, okay, I am the president, I'll admit it, not just the play-by-play guy. And then Roddy Piper revealed that he had been not trying to sign the match and was sort of avoiding Piper. And then it became Eric Bischoff, who's president of WCW, has now joined the NWO. So he became this heel president, boss character immediately. Like, he reveals himself, and then like a couple weeks later, he's in the NWO. So that was done. That was late 96. Now, Vince McMahon himself was still behind the desk. He still played off as just Vince McMahon, the announcer, what a maneuver, all that stuff. And then he finally, as 97 going on, he had the tease with Bret Hart. Bret Hart lost a cage match, and he threw a fit at Vince and all this and all that, and sort of teased at it. And finally, Vince McMahon just admits, okay, I'm not just an announcer. I am the chairman, or I don't know what his technical term was at that time, but I'm the chairman of the company, my company, I'm the boss. And that was the beginning of, that was the transition from announcer Vince to Vince McMahon, damn it. That's where it became. He became evil Vince. And of course, the thing that pushed it over the edge was Montreal. And again, that's a whole different story, and we'll get to that some other time. So for a short period of time, the figureheads in both WWF and WCW were the guys actually making the calls. So they weren't necessarily figureheads. I mean, I'm sure they were exaggerated versions of themselves on TV, but they were making the decisions, and they were making the decisions on TV. So they were doing both. Now that would change. Of course, Bischoff would in real life at one point be suspended, and then as a character be suspended. So sort of that life imitating art and all that stuff. And WCW would put J.J. Dillon in charge from the WCW Championship Committee. But J.J. Dillon would come in. He was the guy who made the decisions. He was the guy who booked the match. He was the guy famously trying to sign Sting to a match. And Sting would come down, and they'd say, we'll give you Kurt Hennig, and Sting tears up the contract and leave. We'll give you this guy. No. And finally it got to Sting versus Hogan. So the whole setup to that involved J.J. Dillon as that figurehead character. Vince McMahon would have that power for a long time, and at one point he would actually have to compete over ownership of the company with, of all people, Steve Austin. Stone Cold Steve Austin was the CEO of the WWF for, I believe, 3-4 weeks maybe, because it was the culmination of that higher power storyline. And there's a part that people forget about that storyline is when they go, Vince McMahon reveals himself. It was me, Austin. It was me all along, all that stuff. And when he does it, when he does all that, people go, well, Steve Austin immediately comes out. Stephanie and Linda, and Stephanie's still really innocent this time, come out and reveal that, well, how could you do this? Well, you know what? We had a meeting. We named a new CEO. The new CEO is Steve Austin. And people say, well, how did they know? Well, what people forget about that is the week before, the corporate ministry, tied Steve Austin in the ropes, and the higher power, someone who we to that point did not know who he was, pulled his hood up and showed only Steve Austin who he was. So Steve Austin had a week head start. So all he had to do was go to Linda and Stephanie and say what happened. And then he became the CEO, and they fought, and there was a ladder match, and someone moved the briefcase, which was something I've never explained, and then Vince McMahon and Shane gained 100% of the company. So it was on and off, but really, for the most part, Vince McMahon was the evil boss most of the Attitude Era, and it worked because it was him and Austin, so it made sense to do that. On the WCW end, there was a lot of chaos. WCW didn't seem like they knew what they were doing. They were changing commissioners. I mean, at one point, it was Eric Bischoff. Eric Bischoff legitimately got sent home in August 99 or something like that. He had a meeting and basically told talent if they don't want to be there, he'd sign their releases. One guy took him up on it, was Raven, and a couple weeks later, he got sent home. They hired Vince Russo, which was a great idea, really gangbusters. He comes in as the powers that be, which was basically his accent, which was his accent as a shadow. They never actually showed him. That went for a few weeks, didn't work. They send him home, and then behind the scenes, they just put Kevin Sullivan as the booker, and then around this time, they made Kevin Nash commissioner on screen because they didn't know what to do. And then a few months go by where Kevin Nash just exploits his power as both a booker and a wrestler. What are the odds? And then they decide, hey, you know what's better than Bischoff and Russo apart? Bischoff and Russo together. Yeah, that lasted about 2 months. And then Bash of the Beach happened, brother. And they kept Russo, of all people. Bischoff was gone, and Russo was the power. And then later, when they finally got rid of, they had Russo, and then in the middle of all this, they also had like commissioners. It got weird because they had Ernst the Cat Miller was a commissioner. Mike Sanders was a commissioner. At one point, Ric Flair, in my head, they're all jumbled up on the order because they're all messed up. At one point, Ric Flair on TV was the president of WCW, but he kept saying president of the United States. He kept saying that. He fought with Piper over it. Sting won the presidency and then immediately gave it back. That was late 99, I believe. There was so much going on. You didn't know who was in power week to week. It was like watching an episode of TNA back in the day where there were 4 power figures and everyone had the power to do everything. WCW was very much like that. And then at the fall of WCW came the Invasion. Now, this is a sore subject for a lot of people because they have eyes, and the Invasion was not good. It was terrible, I would even argue. During the Invasion, Shane McMahon and Steph McMahon, the owners of WCW and ECW respectively, hold your applause and laughter, and say that to buy the companies, they sold their WWF stock to a consortium. Now, a consortium is one of those fancy words that many wrestling fans only know because they've heard it on wrestling, like occipital protuberance or in abeyance. You know the ones. So after the Invasion is finally mercifully put down, the consortium is revealed to be Ric Flair. So now the WWF might have been controlled by that point by one person, Vince McMahon, against everyone else, with occasional annoyances with Steve Austin and so on and so forth. Now there were 2 owners. There was Vince McMahon and Ric Flair, back and forth, back and forth. They existed for a little bit, and then finally they decided to do the brand split. They split the companies. Ric Flair got Raw, and Vince McMahon got SmackDown. Now that existed for a little bit until Steve Austin took his ball and went home, and then Vince McMahon books Brock Lesnar to commit elder abuse, and then Vince McMahon gains 100% of the company yet again. He immediately decides to pick general managers for both brands. SmackDown gets Stephanie McMahon, who immediately groveled after the Invasion storyline and kept her slimy little character, and he makes her the SmackDown you remember her the GM of SmackDown, a few of my words there, dyslexic. And Raw got, of all people, Eric Bischoff. Eric Bischoff is the GM of Raw. I'll be honest with you, that was the most surprising thing I'd ever seen in my entire life up to that point, and I think it amazed a bunch of people. So it was really cool for what it was. Eric Bischoff held that job, that character, on TV for about 3 years, which is an eternity in pro wrestling these days. I mean, you can do an entire world title angle in 3 months. This guy held this position on TV as a character for 3 years. So that's insane. Now, he held it long enough that he actually at one point hired former porn star and even more former anti-porn crusader Val Venus as his chief of staff Morley. He had a co-GM, which was Steve Austin, which was really fun for a while. He also had a co-GM for a very short while with Mick Foley before another falling out between Vince and Mick, which at some point they're gonna have to make a movie just about that. On the SmackDown side, Stephanie would hold the job for a little over a year. I mean, really, SmackDown would become a little more chaotic on their who was in charge. But let's focus on the Raw side for a second. On the Raw side, Eric Bischoff would hold the GM position on Raw until 2005. From 2002 to 2005, he'd hold the position. After he was publicly dumped into a garbage truck and dropped in the streets because Vince McMahon couldn't do that in 1998, so good enough. Vince McMahon became the interim for about 6 months. Then Jonathan Coachman was put in charge. He held it for a little bit. Then William Regal for a bit. William Regal for, again, about 6-7 months. Jonathan Coachman again. Then Mike Adamle. Mike Adamle held it from July 28, 2008 to November 3rd, 2008. And in that time, I have to say he was the most boring, the most terrible, just god-awful. Mike Adamle was great on American Gladiators. I'm sure he was great in football. I'm sure he was a great broadcaster. And on a personal level, what he's going through right now, I feel bad for him. I really do. So it's not a personal attack on it. But in this environment, when you start your career as Jeff Harvey and use lines like "Jamaican me crazy," it can only go downhill from there. And that's what happened. He was like that go away heat. People didn't like him, and Vince McMahon took that as, hey, people hate him, let's make him the boss. And it didn't go well. And I remember distinctly, he quoted Ronald Reagan in his retirement speech. He resigned from the position for no reason. There was no angle into it. He just resigned because it just wasn't working. And he quoted Ronald Reagan to a crowd that, quite frankly, was probably too drunk to care. Let's call it what it is. And then Stephanie McMahon held it for a while. Vicky Guerrero held it on Raw from April 2009 to June 2009. Then there was Bret Hart for about a month. Big Guerrero's held it a couple times. Bret Hart held it. And then there was the anonymous Raw general manager. Now this came through, it was never really explained. It was just, there was a laptop and with a podium and a laptop and a podium and a sign that said anonymous Raw GM and a pop-up message, like a text message or chat room, whatever the hell the noise was supposed to be. And then Michael Cole would walk up and start with the famous lines, and I quote, and they'd make a match. And there's this idea, at first when they first started doing it, from June 21st, 2010, when they first started this, you're thinking, okay, they might be leading to it. And they sort of teased at it, well, maybe it's somebody else, maybe it's this person, maybe it's that person. Hey, it could be, I heard at one point, it could be Dusty Rhodes, that'd be different. So on and so on and so on and so on. And they never really did anything with it. It was just week after week, a laptop was telling people what to do, week after week after week. For a year, the Raw general manager was a laptop with no accountability because you didn't know who it was. No one knew who it was. Michael Cole is on TV. Michael Cole didn't know who it was. Week after week after week after week. You know what they really did with it? They did what every time WWF doesn't know how to finish an angle. Here's what they did with it. They made it Hornswoggle. Yeah. When they were gonna make Ken Kennedy the illegitimate son of Vince McMahon, what are the odds? And it didn't work out because Ken Kennedy's a moron. They made it Hornswoggle. When they had a GM position here, the anonymous GM, they didn't know who to make it. They made it Hornswoggle. You know what? Go back in time. I'm pretty sure if they could, if the WWF actually had a time machine, they'd find a way to make Hornswoggle in the car that ran over Steve Austin. They will do it. I mean, that's what they'll do. They'll find a way to make Hornswoggle do everything. So that was just an easy out. That mercifully end. Triple H was in charge for a bit. John Laurinaitis was put in a position as a temporary GM of Raw after Triple H, the COO, was given a vote of no confidence in that whole thing. Temporary interim GM. He eventually, as an interim GM, had a team versus team match with Teddy Long, who was the GM of SmackDown. Believe me, we'll get to SmackDown. In which John Laurinaitis won. So John Laurinaitis, who is a temporary Raw GM, becomes the permanent GM of both Raw and SmackDown. It was never explained. It's just, oh, you're temporary. Oh, now you're in charge of both. After. And then on top of this, after they revealed the anonymous Raw GM was Hornswoggle, which was ridiculous. Whatever. Then when they don't know what to do, about a year later, they reveal it in 2011. A year later, they go, screw it. They bring back the anonymous Raw General Manager for one night. They've already revealed it to be Hornswoggle. And they go, nah, screw it. Let's do it one night. That's when you know they have no idea what they're doing. Then Vince McMahon fell in love with AJ Lee. I don't know about real life, but character-wise, she was General Manager from July of 2012 to October of 2012 because Vince McMahon, that was the one where she was going to marry Daniel Bryan, and Vince McMahon comes out and offers her the GM position because apparently you can't do both. Vicky Guerrero becomes a managing supervisor from October 2012 to July 2013. Then Brad Maddox, oh, what fun he was, who was in charge because he was like the suck up for Vicky Guerrero. And then Brad Maddox became the GM, but it didn't matter because around that time the Authority was coming to power. So Brad Maddox, although he was the GM, was really a gopher for Stephanie McMahon and Triple H because, you know, that's a great position. And then of course Brad Maddox would get fired for saying a word that Vince McMahon didn't like, and Vince McMahon would later say the F word on live TV. So, you know, priorities. Following the Authority, they'd bring Vicky Guerrero back, then the Authority would come back, then Daniel Bryan had power for one night, and then 3 years after they revealed it to be Hornswoggle, they brought back the anonymous Raw General Manager for one night. Why? Your guess is as good as mine. I don't know. Their writers were on salvia, and they just went, laptop. I don't know. They were drunk. Mick Foley came in as the GM after the split again. He held it from July 2016 to March 2017. Then Kurt Angle came in April 2017 and holds the position. Well, he held the position until he was outdone by a guy who took a bald spot and just said, let's commit Foley and Baron Corbin, the Constable of Fear, or whatever the hell he wants to be called. That is Raw in a nutshell. That's just Raw. SmackDown's even more complicated. SmackDown's GM role was started by Stephanie McMahon. When Vince McMahon gained power again on TV, he immediately gave the control of the thing to his daughter, which at the time was brilliant move, Vince. She had the job on TV for a little over a year, and then she got the snot kicked out of her by her own father on TV, and Paul Heyman took the job. Paul Heyman was in great position, but that's a great position for Paul Heyman because he gets to talk, he gets to have power, but he's not responsible for writing the checks. So, good job, Paul. He held it from October of 2003 to March of 2004. Kurt Angle, when he was injured following WrestleMania, became the GM from March of 2004 to July of 2004, just in time for him to get better. Then Teddy Long comes along. Teddy Long gets the job in July 29, 2004, and holds it until September 21, 2007. Teddy Long, the human milk dud, the former ref, the former manager, the guy who used to manage Ice Train for crying out loud, Theodore Long, held the GM position for 3 years. That's insane. Then Vicky Guerrero gets the position in September 28, 2007, holds it till April 6, 2009. Again, around 2 years. Then Theodore Long gets it back again for almost another 2 years. There's trade between Teddy Long and Vicky Guerrero. It's insane. And of course, Teddy Long was in charge of SmackDown. Theodore, Teddy, whatever. I know him as Teddy. I've always known him as Teddy Long. He was a ref, he was a manager, so on and so forth. You can't manage Ice Train and live that down. That's all I'm gonna say. Yeah, there's a lot of shots on Ice Train today. I'm not sure why. Whatever. It's better than M.I. Smooth. Theodore Long was in charge of SmackDown for, again, about 2 years. Almost 2 years. And then, of course, he was defeated in a 5-man or whatever the hell, 10-man tag match at WrestleMania by Mr. Personality himself, John Laurinaitis' team. John Laurinaitis, who then runs Raw and SmackDown. Laurinaitis is replaced by Booker T. Booker T holds the job for, again, another 7-8 month run. And then he's replaced by Vicky Guerrero. The Guerrero is there. Then the Authority just takes over the whole company because, you know, that was great. I don't know. That got tiring. And then, of course, most recently, the Daniel Bryan GM position, who he was in the position because he was still employed with the company and wasn't allowed to take shots to the head anymore, and it was a good call in all sincerity. And then eventually he got cleared again and was replaced by Paige, another person who cannot physically wrestle anymore, but still is a part of the company. So that's SmackDown. So again, this is, of course, this covers from, honestly, I started with Jack Tunney, so we're talking from the 80s until 2018. So that is a huge gap. So understand there's a lot of names, but there should be a lot of names. If it was one guy for 20 years, it'd get boring. So I understand it, but sometimes it just gets complicated. And although we don't like to think about it, yes, WWE's laughable version of ECW had its own GMs. And no, I know what you're thinking. They probably put a hat and a jacket on a pile of rotten cat turds. But no, they actually used real people. Real people agreed to be the phony commissioner of a brand that sucked. That involved a zombie on the first episode getting the crap kicked out of him by the Sandman. Paul Heyman, of course, was the most likely candidate from May 22, 2006 to December, right around the time that December to Dismember happened and really destroyed, well, everything. But the brand kept going. Talk about a zombie. Estrada, who again, Vince McMahon fell in love with very shortly, was the commissioner from August 2007 to June 2008. Then Theodore Long, this guy goes everywhere. Theodore Long they just put, at one point, I think he was in charge of marketing. They just put him in charge of everything. They blamed everything on Hornswoggle, and Theodore Long was in charge of everything from June 2008 until April of 2009. And then Tiffany. Who's Tiffany? I have no idea. Tiffany. Someone named Tiffany was the general manager of... The general manager, I can't even say it out again without laughing. Someone named Tiffany was the general manager of ECW from April 14, 2009 to February 16, 2010. And then ECW mercifully died, hopefully for the last time. Hopefully, Tiffany, Paul Heyman, Armando Estrada, Theodore Long, and Tiffany. Sure. There's nothing you can say there. Just sure. Whatever. Yeah. Then, of course, there's the other GMs. There's the GMs of NXT, which is currently William Regal, who's doing a great job. I think he has that amazing. He has that air of authority, and I think he does it really well. Very subtle, very good. And then there's Drake Maverick, who doing his best rock star Spud impersonation in the land of cruiserweights. Now, in the middle of all this, while you had the actual GMs, I wanted to talk about this. The reason the reference to, of course, Summerfest. There was the guest GMs. For a while, the WWE got this idea of bringing every B and C level celebrity they could imagine onto their air, and for a week, give them the ability to be the guest general manager of the show. It started with Shaquille O'Neal, who had just retired from basketball, but he retired from monster trucks. Yeah, basketball. Duh. And he had a confrontation with Big Show, which they failed to capitalize on for years, money and all. And then they did randomly at a WrestleMania, the Andre the Giant Battle Royal, which went nowhere, and they're still talking about a match. But Big Show's pretty much done in the ring. Shaquille O'Neal's mumbling his way through a Fox broadcast, but there's always dreams of two giant men who can barely move finally competing against each other in a professional wrestling match. It's always good to dream, folks. And then they would just have some that made sense, and they had some that were just obvious cash grabs. They had Bob Barker on there promoting his book. They had Florence Henderson on there promoting her, I think, book. I don't know. Silent movie. She's an old woman. They had Rampage Jackson and Sharlto Copley, brought them on to promote the new 18 movie, but they had them do it in character, I think. It was weird. And they were just bringing people on that were just week to week. And then, of course, the whole thing was, they do a skit with Santino, because there was nothing funnier than Santino Marella for a while there. He just had a bad Italian accent, and they just had him mispronounce words all the time. So if he was Bob Barker, it was Bob Barker, like some crap like that. Now imagine that stretched out over 10 minutes. That's pretty much what they did. And they always had the Bella twins involved, because that was their grand contribution to the business at the time, was hanging around the guest GM, acting like they belonged there. And I don't know, that was pretty much it. For a bit, that's all they did. The line, of course, I'm referring to is Summerfest. Promoting their new, horrible movie, The Goods, Jeremy Piven and Dr. Ken Jeong, real doctor, appeared on Raw and proceeded to do an in-ring promo hyping up the night. And during it, they threatened Miz, and John Cena and The Miz came to the ring, and they were middle of an angle, and they come to the ring, and during it, Jeremy Piven threatens to ban The Miz from their upcoming pay-per-view, Summerfest. John Cena, being the company guy that he is, immediately covers for him. Yeah, you mean SummerSlam. And I was like, Yeah. Oh yeah, SummerSlam. But right there, that exemplified what was going on. That was when you knew, oh yeah, these people are here to promote this movie. They don't give a crap about the product, and people crapped on it. My thing is, like, not everyone has to be a wrestling fan. I get that. You know, you can go to wherever you want, promote whatever you want, but if you're gonna at least get the names of the basics right. Like, if you come to the ring and someone called him Jim Cena, yeah, you're gonna go, oh, this guy doesn't know the product. This guy doesn't know shit. This guy doesn't know one thing about the product. He just called it Summerfest. And the Raw GM, the guest GMs were hit and miss, and near the end they were a miss. They were horrible. So yeah, so I wanted to do a little special moment on that, because that was just, it was a time they were like, oh, we're bringing in celebrities, but they were bringing in, like, I can't even remember all the people they brought in, but there were some that were god awful. I remember Florence Henderson, who could not have cared one bit less. Bob Barker was there. I don't know if Bob Barker likes wrestling, or if he remembers, you know, as a young kid watching Gorgeous George or whatever the hell, you know. He probably watched Strangler Lewis or something like that. But he was promoting his book. That's what he was there for. Everyone knew it. Florence Henderson was there for, it was just horrible. And it was this crossover that was like, hey, go watch this terrible movie. Whatever. But yeah, those are the guest GMs, and they were hit and miss. So I went a long time on that topic. I realized that. Like, I didn't think I'd go that long on it. I thought this would be, like, I didn't think it'd be short, but I didn't think it'd be this long. This is actually probably the longest episode I've done so far. If, again, this was just an idea I had, you know. So, again, if you have any ideas, topics, questions, death threats, want to tell me to shut up, I don't care. Put a post below the video, send a comment, message me, tell Frank, I don't care. Get hold of somebody, tell me what you want to do. Maybe you have a question, or maybe you just have a topic you want to talk about. Either way, I'm here, I'm listening, and until next time, my name's Dan, this is Exploder, have a good one.